Hello. Tetrapanax Papyrifer Rex, the rice paper plant. Isn't this an incredible specimen of a plant? Look at these leaves, they're absolutely amazing. Now bear in mind that this plant has only been in this border for 2 seasons. It's just reaching the end of its second summer. We're into October, and in this video I'm going to talk about winter protection, winter care, or winterizing as the Americans say, for this particular plant, the Tetrapanax Papyrifer Rex. Before we get into that, I'm going to run some footage of what this plant looked like only 6 months ago when it came out of last winter. Now there are 3 important points which inform how you might decide to winterize or overwinter this plant, and I'm going to share those 3 points with you in this video. But before we do that, let's just admire this plant a little bit longer. These leaves are 18 inches across. Believe it or not, this plant can grow 5 meters in height. This is approximately 1.5 meters at the moment, so you can get a scale of just how big these amazing plants can become. They can become tree-like. Now here I have got 2 trunks, and the reason I've got 2 trunks is a direct result of how I overwintered this plant last year. We'll come back to that, all will be revealed. Now this plant can be propagated by seed, and it will produce fluffy white flowers which will eventually produce seed. But there's a second way this plant will propagate, and that has happened right here. There are 2 trunks here. That doesn't necessarily mean there are 2 plants, but if you disturb the soil around the roots of this plant and give it a kind of a threat notification and make it react, it will produce pups. That is exactly what this has done over here. I've got a Tetrapanax sucker down here in the border. I'll give you a bit of a view of it, but you can just about see the leaf here in my hand, and that is nearly 1.5 meters away from the parent plant. This plant can be a bit of a beast, and it can be quite invasive, so you've got to be careful where you plant it. Let's get back to winter protection for this incredible plant, and I want to tell you those 3 points which are important points to remember, which will inform how you decide you might want to overwinter your Tetrapanax. The first point is, and I will repeat these and I'll put them in the description box below this video. The first point is, if this plant avoids frost, if it is kept frost-free all winter, it will be evergreen. It will keep its leaves. The second point is, if it is exposed to some frost but not heavy frost, it will be deciduous. In other words, it will shed its leaves, it won't be evergreen, but the trunk will survive. Point number 3 is, if this plant is exposed to severe prolonged frost, the trunk will die, but it will grow back from the base, providing you treat it correctly for the winter. All will become clear, but let me just repeat those 3 points. If this plant avoids frost completely, it will remain evergreen. If it's exposed to mild frost, it will be deciduous. It will lose its leaves, but the trunk will survive. If it's exposed to prolonged, heavy, deep frost, the trunk will probably die back to the ground, and then it will shoot up from the ground next spring, providing that you don't let the root go into a deep freeze situation. So this informs how we protect these plants in the winter. And it depends what result you want. If you want it to keep its leaves and stay evergreen, you're going to have to stop the frost. getting to the entire plant, which to me is going to be a challenging and difficult job, because look at the size of it. You'd have to build a conservatory around it. If you want the trunk to survive, so that it starts producing leaves from its existing trunk next year, you can protect the trunk above the ground in the best way that you can, so that it's not exposed to severe frost. However, if you're happy to let the trunk die, as we did last year, because that's exactly what we did, it died down to the ground and it shooted 2 new pups from the ground. That's why I've got 2 trunks. Last year's trunk is down there and it's dead, but that didn't kill the plant. What I did last year was I mulched the roots for this plant, and I say mulch, 6 inches of fresh manure went on top of the root of that plant. Then I put weed fabric over that mulch, and then I put straw around the trunk. It's in a shady courtyard. It doesn't get too cold here, certainly not in the ground next to my neighbour's kitchen wall. So my protection method last year was to let it die down to the ground, so that it's now produced these 2 new pups. But I really went to town on protecting the root through the winter. And that root did not freeze, it was protected, and that meant that it grew back. Like this, all of this growth in the last 6 months this year. Now this year, I want to try and protect the trunk so that I get a progressively taller and taller tree. Eventually the trunk will become so hard that I won't need to protect it again, but we're not there yet. So this year what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow it to drop its leaves, but I'm going to protect the trunk even more, so that next spring it starts producing leaves from the old trunk and I'll get a bigger tree. So that's method 2. Method 3 would be to build a frame around it. Protect that with probably bubble wrap, possibly even put a heated mat in there and fill it full of straw, so that it stays all above freezing all winter. I'm not going to opt for that method because I don't necessarily want to protect the leaves through the winter. It would just be too big, too challenging a job to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect the trunk, mulch the roots, and hopefully in the springtime I'll have a tree trunk that's still alive, that produces fresh leaves in the spring and a really healthy rootstock below the ground. So that is how and why you protect your Tetrapanax Papyrifer Rex. By the way, there's some debate as to whether these are Rex or not. Actually, it is said that they're all part of the same genus of plant, but some of them do have a slightly different shape leaf. But whatever Tetrapanax you've got, think of winter protection in exactly the same way. So there we go. Evergreen if frost-free, deciduous if exposed to some frost, but it will die all the way down to the ground if it's exposed to a heavy frost. And that informs how you protect your Tetrapanax. Whilst we're here in the UK exotic tropical border, let's just have a look at some of the other plants that have happened this year in this border. Every single one of these plants was left in the ground last winter, and it was protected by a heavy mulch with weed fabric on top. These are cannas, Canna musifolia. 9 foot high, don't produce flowers. Down at the back there, I've got 3, 4, 5 colocasia pink chinas. That's a hardy plant, that will stay in the winter. That one is colocasia esculenta. Last winter I had 20 of them. I dug most of them up. The ones I dug up I put in the garage. They all perished. This one I left in the ground under 4 inches of manure, and it's the only one that survived. It's my only stock of colocasia esculenta. I've got a ginger here which is still in flower. I've got Persicaria down there, I've got a tree fern, and I've got my Musa Basjou bananas over here. Let me bring you in a bit closer. Here are the Musa Basjou. These will need protecting this winter. That will be the subject of another video. Did it last year, but basically I'll remove the leaves and protect the trunk, as I will the Tetrapanax. I've got another colocasia pink china here. Look at those lovely leaves and a lovely pink stem on the trunks there. Another ginger. I've got Crinium down there, Crinium Potwellii, which produces a lovely pink flower. And that is my UK exotic tropical border. Hope you've enjoyed that overview of how to protect the Tetrapanax Papyrifer plant, the Chinese rice paper plant. I'm getting a bit distracted because we're expecting a storm and everything is blowing about. But I'll see you soon for some more UK exotic planting adventures. Bye for now.